She was the first Chinese-American woman to serve in a U.S. presidential cabinet. Now Elaine Chao is being nominated to serve as the next U.S. Secretary of Transportation. Hello, I'm Arlen Naidu in Washington, D.C., and this is The Heat. U.S. President-elect Donald Trump is adding some diversity to his cabinet with the nomination of Elaine Chao as U.S. Secretary of Transportation. Chao is Chinese-American with an extensive record in the U.S. government, having served 2 other U.S. presidents. As CCTV's Jessica Stone reports, Chao has often spoken about the importance of U.S.-China relations.
Elaine Chao is no stranger to politics. She served U.S. President George H.W. Bush as Deputy Secretary of Transportation and President George W. Bush as his Secretary of Labor. 4 years ago, she also campaigned for former Republican presidential candidate Mitt Romney. She spoke to CCTV America at that year's Republican National Convention.
I believed in limited government. And I believed in lower taxes. I believed in quality education.
In recent years, Chao has leaned heavily on her Chinese heritage, working with her philanthropist father to build schools in China and to promote educational exchanges between American and Chinese students.
The U.S.-China relations is one of the most important bilateral relationships in the world today.
Like China, the U.S. is poised to make major investments in its infrastructure. Donald Trump has pledged to spend $1 trillion to build new roads, bridges, and airports. As Secretary, Chao would likely play a key role in getting that spending approved by lawmakers. That could put her at odds with her husband, Mitch McConnell. He is the Republican leader in the U.S. Senate and has put other issues well ahead of infrastructure on the Senate priority list. While it is unclear how much of Trump's proposed funding would come from the federal budget, McConnell is a well-known obstacle to increased government spending. But in choosing Chao to be his chief promoter on infrastructure spending, Trump could get leverage over reluctant Republicans, including McConnell. And infrastructure spending is a key area of agreement between Trump and Democrats in Congress. The next U.S. Secretary of Transportation may need to work closer, though, with Democrats to address other issues, too, like how and where to deploy commercial drones and how to regulate the use of self-driving cars on U.S. roads. Jessica Stone, Washington.
Joining us now in our Washington, D.C. studio is Norman Mineta. He served as U.S. Secretary of Commerce and U.S. Secretary of Transportation during the Clinton and Bush administrations. From Chicago, we're joined by Frank Wu. He is a distinguished professor at the University of California, Hastings College of Law, and the chairman of the Committee of 100. Also with us is Chilling Tong. She is the founder and CEO of the International Leadership Foundation right here in Washington, D.C. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Mr. Secretary, let me start with you. You are the son of immigrants to the United States, a champion of civil rights. What do you make of Elaine Chao's nomination to be Secretary of Transportation?
Oh, I think it's a great nomination. She's got a great background in service in the government, in the private sector, as well as the nonprofit world. She, when she was head of United Way, she turned the United Way around. And with her business background, education at Harvard, and with, her dad is a great philanthropist. Her mother also is very dedicated to education. And in fact, there's a building named after Elaine's mother at Harvard. So she's the only woman whose name is on a building, as well as first Asian American at Harvard University. So, but Elaine herself is well suited because she was Deputy Secretary of Transportation under Elizabeth Dole. So, and she was the longest serving Secretary of Labor. So she comes well equipped to handle the job.
Right, and Mr. Secretary, you've actually worked with Elaine Chao.
Very much so.
Looking at the current makeup of this incoming new administration, what would she bring to it?
Well, first of all, her own background. Everyone says, well, she's Mitch McConnell's husband. Well, she could have been Mitch Jones's husband, Mitch Smith's wife, rather, because she has her own reputation on her own. Sometimes I think he ought to be known as Elaine Chao's husband.
Chilling, put this nomination in some kind of perspective for us. How significant is the nomination of Elaine Chao, not just for minorities, but for women as well?
Oh, absolutely. You know, first of all, I'm so honored on the panel with the Secretary Mineta. When we have seen this kind of thing, we're just so excited. And, you know, Secretary, as you mentioned, served on the two presidents as a Cabinet Secretary for Transportation and Commerce. And now we have a woman doing the same thing. For me, because I'm a Republican, so people ask me, you know, especially from immigrant and minority community, they are curious what's the direction of Trump administration is going to. And I told them, look at that. You know, South Carolina governor, you know, Nikki Haley as ambassador to UN, and now we have a secretary, you know, as a transportation secretary, and also Seema Verma as a director of a Center of Medicaid. And also we have a Deborah Wang Yang will be a chairwoman of SEC. And look at that, I just feel that's very significant for all communities. Because some candidates, they can say something, but after they get elected, they wouldn't care about us. So like Elaine Chao's appointments and others, because herself has tremendous record of achievements. But most importantly, I think the Trump administration reached out to the brilliance and will to give them important post.
Okay, let's bring Frank in. He's in Chicago. And Frank, you are the chairman of one of the biggest Chinese organizations here in the United States, the Committee of 100. What has Elaine Chao brought to the Chinese American community in the U.S.?
Well, we are very proud. The group that I head seeks to build bridges. C100 is all about Chinese Americans as leaders, knowing both American culture and Chinese culture and being able to reach out. And I think when we look at the career of this outstanding candidate, someone with just vast experience, both government and private sector, we see those same traits. That bridge building. For everyone who's Chinese American, you learn that it doesn't matter who you are, what generation, where you came from, whether you're assimilated or not, what language you speak at home, you have to build bridges, because when people look at you, they expect that you will know a little something about China. So the choice of Chao, I think, is just a fantastic choice. It shows this opportunity to build bridges to Asian Americans, to Chinese Americans. So that's good in terms of politics here. And it's an opportunity to show that there's understanding of U.S.-China ties and their significance within the cabinet.
Mr. Secretary, you served as Secretary of Transportation in the Bush cabinet. Well, of course, times change, circumstances change, but if Ms. Chao is confirmed by Congress, what are the kinds of unique challenges she will face in that position?
Well, first of all, because the president has talked about the $1 trillion in infrastructure, the big issue is going to get the financing for that program. And so she'll have to be working with the House and Senate Finance Committee and the
with her
House
husband.
Ways and Means Committee and her husband. A lot of pillow talk, I think, will have to be engaged there to get things done.
Chilling, in 1992, as the Secretary told us just a few moments ago, Ms. Chao took charge of the United Way of America. That's a very big charitable organization in the country. There was a lot of controversy at the time over the organization's finances, over the man who led it at that time, but she restored order. She cut staff, she put the finances in order. What did she bring to that?
Well, I think no matter what kind of job Secretary Chao is taking, she takes very, very seriously.
Right.
I have known her for 20 years. Not only United Way, but Peace Corps, where she worked for transportation and the labor, Secretary of Labor. She always put her efforts. She wants things so perfect. And she, the most importantly, when she doing all this mainstream work, she always thinking about the Asian American community too. Like a United Way, she cut her salary, and she herself as a great example to people know, look, we're doing the nonprofit organization, so let's just put the priority first. And she's very good communicator. She clearly communicate with her employee, how to make the priority. I remember when she worked for Department of Labor, she's very clear what she wants to do. But all importantly, she put Asian American community as the priority. She put a big event conference like an annual opportunity conference. She invited about thousands of companies to participate to understand government rule and regulation. And also she hosted Asian Pacific Federal Summit, and have to share with all the Asian employee, federal employee, to participate, to understand how they can get promoted. So I think when people work for her, they feel they can get a reward, because as long as their hard work, she will recognize all their good efforts. So I think that's why United Way could be so successful under her leadership.
All right, Frank, if we look at the relationship between the United States and China, it's one of the most important relationships in the world. And here we have Elaine Chao, who's serving in the cabinet. Is it likely that President Trump, when he becomes president, will seek her advice, more than just advice on trains and planes, but also on improving that relationship, making it stronger, the relationship between the U.S. and China?
We certainly hope so. She is qualified, knowledgeable, well-versed. She really knows this subject. So this is someone who has both the real technical expertise and competence in the fields that she's worked in, plus this family history and background that she brings to bear. And that's so important, just that perspective, to not have prejudice, to be more sympathetic, to have some understanding of culture, language, history. You can't quite measure how important that is, but I think it will certainly be very significant, and very few people will have access at that level, and also this type of background about China. So it's just invaluable.
Mr. Secretary, there's lots of talk about investment in infrastructure, lots of money involved in this. So looking ahead, Elaine Chao is going to play a key role, not just in the cabinet, but in the economic future of the country as well, wouldn't she?
Oh, absolutely, because no matter what you talk about, transportation is really at the base of it. Right. Whether it's whatever you eat with it, whatever we wear, transportation is a vital part of our economy. So it is very important that the infrastructure program move ahead, because to a very great extent it's been neglected, and so we need the financing to have it move forward, because the gasoline tax as we know it now is insufficient going into the Highway Trust Fund to finance all the projects that are needed.
Jerry, just one quick note on Elaine Chao's personality, if I could put it that way. Both, Elaine Chao and her family, her father, were very big on philanthropy, and she in fact runs the philanthropy program at the Heritage Foundation. What values does she bring to that?
I have to say Secretary Chao is a very, very charming person. When she walks into a room, she's just like a star. She has great personality and always very positive thinking. When we are Asian American, we're with her, she always encourages us. She's always, paying back to the community. Like her father, Dr. James Chao, she the same thing. And I think it's around from the family. Because every time I'm with them, I just feel very, very touched. The way she is, in Chinese saying, is respect the parents, but also very 孝顺. It's just like the way she treated her father, I just feel unbelievable. Even at home, her father kind of teach them, has served tea to the guest. So I think this is a kind of tradition, just like you have mentioned that. I think that the philanthropy part plays a very significant role in their family. Every single of them, they are doing this. Like her sister, Angela, is doing the same thing. So when Chao Center was established at Harvard University, I participated in the event. And it's just unbelievable. A lot of successful business people, they want to buy jet, they want to buy some, luxury thing. But for them, they just want to pay back to the community. So I feel it's kind of maybe from the American way, but also I think it's a Chinese way. So I just very fortunate to see how this lady can balance the Chinese, American and the Western culture. And also most importantly, they share their stories. I think it's a very inspirational story to our community. I think we should follow follow that role.
Okay, I want to thank you and the Secretary for being with us on the show. We are going to take a break right now. Next, we'll discuss another key appointment by U.S. President-elect Donald Trump and how it could help relations between Washington and Beijing. And Frank Wu stays with us in Chicago for that. Stay with us. You're watching The Heat. Welcome back to The Heat. U.S. President-elect Donald Trump will nominate Iowa Governor Terry Branstad as the next U.S. ambassador to China. His appointment may help ease trade tensions between the two countries. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Liu Kang called Branstad, quote, an old friend. Chinese President Xi Jinping visited Iowa in 2012, 9 months before he became the Chinese leader. Tensions have worsened between Beijing and Washington after recent tweets by Trump and a phone call with Taiwan's leader undermining the One China policy. For more on China-U.S. relations from Beijing, we're joined by Victor Gao. He's a Chinese international relations expert. Here in our Washington, D.C. studio is Brian Becker. He's the executive director of the Answer Coalition. And still with us from Chicago is Frank Wu. He's a distinguished professor at the University of California, Hastings College of Law. And thanks to all of you for being with us. Victor, let me start with you. Terry Branstad, nominated to serve as U.S. ambassador to China under the incoming Donald Trump administration. What's been the reaction to that in Beijing?
I think this is a very good nomination, and I hope the governor of Iowa will go through the Senate hearing smoothly and become the U.S. ambassador. China-U.S. relations at this moment are at a very critical moment, and there is a lot of uncertainty and unpredictability. And I think on the Chinese side, we really need to hold the ground very firmly and aggressively promote goodwill and China-U.S. friendship and relations and partnership in the coming 4 years, despite of all the noises, sometimes nasty noises, coming out from the tweets or from the gestures or the phone calls, etc., by President-elect Donald Trump. We hope the gravity of the situation, the heavy responsibilities for nurturing and growing China-U.S. relations will make the governor of Iowa a very, very good and effective ambassador. And we welcome his arrival in Beijing as quickly as possible and become a very good conduit between the Chinese government and the U.S. government, and in this particular case, between President Xi Jinping of China and also the President Donald Trump, eventually when he goes into the White House on January the 20th. We hope the new U.S. ambassador can become a very good bridge to smooth out the problems and to become a catalyst for good, better relations between China and the United States.
Brian, there was something of a big uproar over the weekend after Trump took that telephone call from the leader of Taiwan. Some call that move by Trump reckless, provocative, because it undermines the One China policy. What did you make of that exchange?
Well, it was reckless. It was a provocation. It was clearly a violation of protocol ever since 1979 when the United States agreed to the One China policy. It also has to be put into the context that the Republican Party snuck into its program a very strong plank about being pro-Taiwan. Again, that too should be understood as not just a provocation, but a sign of the direction of the Republican Party. Of course, Donald Trump naming Branstad as the ambassador will be something that will be welcome in China because of his relationship with Xi Jinping and the fact that he might be seeming to indicate that at least there's two brains going on in Donald Trump's head, not just the one of belligerence and provocation. So people will be looking towards it. But I think it's important to remember that Branstad was Donald Trump's pick a long time ago. He was signaling that during the campaign, even before Donald Trump took the call from the Taiwan leader and before Donald Trump carried out this Twitter war against China for objecting, where he said, did China get our permission to devalue its currency? Did China get our permission to build a massive military colossus in the South China Sea? I mean, Terry Branstad was already in line for this nomination before Trump went on his rampage. So I think we have to realize that this is kind of Trump's game right now.
Right. Frank, Brian talks about the Twitter war, and we're seeing something unprecedented here. At the moment, it seems to be foreign policy via a tweet, and Donald Trump has issued some pretty controversial tweets about China, accusing Beijing of currency manipulation, of the military buildup in the South China Sea, of trade policies. Do you see trouble ahead in the Sino-US relationship?
This is a tense moment. We are, I think, seeing the first Twitter presidency. And Twitter is inherently a volatile medium. You know, usually it's young people on Twitter. And with the character limit, you can be angry, but you can't really be reasonable. You can't really carry on a conversation, a real adult conversation. But it's hard to tell. Is this bluster? Is this show? Is this for the sound bites, or is it substantive? This appointment signals that there's something else going on. You know, U.S. policy toward China is now bifurcated. Washington, D.C., on both sides of the aisle, so both parties, has tended to be hostile, belligerent, aggressive. But if you look at governors and mayors, if you go to the state and city level, they're incredibly welcoming of China, and they want to reach out and promote trade in both directions. And so Washington, D.C., compared to Iowa, they're two different worlds as far as China is concerned.
Victor, if the new incoming administration adopts something of an adversarial relationship with China, what would be the consequences of that, and how would China respond?
Well, first of all, China-U.S. relations are so important, both for China as well as for the United States. So any significant damage of the China-U.S. relations will be a disaster for both China as well as for the United States. Secondly, if we talk about the bilateral trade, it's already approaching $600 billion. It's the largest single pair of country-to-country trade volume in the world, and China is the biggest creditor to the United States, and we have hundreds of thousands of Chinese students studying in different universities in the United States, and there are tens of thousands of the American students here in China studying Chinese and teaching English. On the people-to-people level, I think in China we have tremendous amount of goodwill towards the American people, and the Chinese government throughout these years, ever since 1979 or even dating back to 1971, has treated the presidency of the United States with respect, and we expect to have a presidency under Mr. Donald Trump with accountability, respectability, and responsibility, and therefore China will need to hold tight, hold the ground, and hopefully that Mr. Donald Trump will become a more responsible and accountable president serving the real interests of the United States. I don't think among the millions of the American people there is hostility towards China. I think people-to-people relations between China and the United States has already struck deep roots, and no single politician should shake up that foundation of goodwill in China for the United States and vice versa from the American people towards China.
Okay, Brian, let's look at one element of the relationship between the US and China, and that is climate change. Now, both these countries took the lead in the Paris Accord on climate change. Now we have Trump coming in, he's a climate change skeptic. Is that accord now under threat?
I'd say yes. I mean, it's a yes from the Trump administration's point of view. He wants to appoint to be in the EPA not just climate skeptics, climate deniers. I mean, these are the folks who are working with the biggest polluters and say, hey, you know what, it's all good. The world's it's not more dangerous, it's just warming up a little bit. I mean, it's really at that level. The Paris Climate Treaty was perhaps President Obama's biggest signature agreement, in addition to the normalizing relations or temporarily easing tensions with Cuba and the Iran deal. However, if Trump pulls out, the Chinese government has made it clear that China's not pulling out. What will this mean? This will mean that the entire world will look to Washington and say, wait, China, a developing country, is willing to set aside some of its developments in order to prioritize the reduction of carbon emissions, but the United States, the biggest, most powerful, the richest, most industrially advanced country in the world, can't do that. I think that will help isolate the United States. And of course, if Trump has any sort of reasonable heads within his cabinet, they might want to tell him that.
Frank, I've just got a minute left, but so far the response from China to these tweets, to these comments from Donald Trump have been pretty measured. But is there going to come a time when China's going to say, well, enough is enough?
It's been very moderate, very reasonable, and it may be that people are thinking, well, this Twitter, feed, it's just tweets. We can sort of ignore it. We can treat it as we treat Twitter, or we used to until a few months ago. It's just for fun. You know, in the mid-19th century, the U.S. sent Anson Burlingame to Beijing. He was so well-liked as an envoy, Beijing sent him back to D.C. to represent China. I don't know if we should have hopes that high, but relations between the U.S. and China go back a long ways, and they've had ups and downs, and let's hope that we're headed upward despite this current rocky moment.
Okay, Frank Wu, Victor Gar, Brian Becker, thanks to all of you for joining us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for being with us.